Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about the most underrated players going into the 2020 fantasy football season. In specific, we're talking about Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, wide receivers for the Los Angeles Rams. You know, this entire offseason has been a little bit tricky, but the thing that I've continued to notice and kind of been surprised about was how much Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp have been undervalued in the respective drafts that have taken place this offseason. I mean, these players are being drafted in the 4th, potentially even early 5th rounds, and they have both not only proven that they could be wide receiver ones in the National Football League, but with the absence of Brandon Cooks and Todd Gurley, there's so much more opportunity in this Rams offense, and I really do not think that a guy like Robert Woods should be left on your draft boards going into the 2020 season. So we're going to talk about their value, why they've not only proven that they can be wide receiver ones, but why they can once again repeat it in 2020. So before we begin today's video, let me remind all of you, Andrew Kiorkof's 2020 Fantasy Football Draft Guide is now available. Go down in the description of the video. You can find information, whether it's a video that I talk about everything that's inside of that, regarding the Patreon, regarding the website. All that information is down below for those of you who are interested in catching that this off season. Outside of that, don't forget to click the subscribe button, join the community, because there will be more fantasy football videos like this coming your way. Again, this is one of our newer series. We're going to keep doing these most underrated player series, probably for a variety of positions, of course, quarterbacks, running backs, and tight ends going into the future. But we start off today with Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, but beginning with Robert Woods, because truth be told, we know Cooper Kupp's a good wide receiver, and sure, he might be more undervalued than Robert Woods, but Robert Woods, in my opinion, should have been a wide receiver one even last season. He only played 15 games, but if he played an entire 16-game season, he was on pace to finish as the number 12 overall wide receiver in fantasy, and that was mainly because he was so effective on the field. I mean, 139 total targets for 90 receptions, 1,134 receiving yards, on top of the fact that he had himself 2 receiving touchdowns and 187.9 fantasy points. Now, the reason on screen you see extra yards, that's his combined total. The thing about Robert Woods, in the past 2 seasons, he's not only surpassed 100 rushing yards, but he's also had 1 rushing touchdown each of the last 2 seasons. And that's the thing that kind of separates himself from other wide receivers. He's got an extra influx of points on a weekly basis that can definitely make your fantasy week with him having a couple, 20-yard burst runs on a jet sweep. Robert Woods definitely kind of gives you an extra, level of opportunity there that he can have on a weekly basis. Outside of that, again, we've definitely seen him produce as a wide receiver one. Sure, he may have finished as the number 17 overall wide receiver in a half-point PPR scoring format last season, but Robert Woods in 2018 was a wide receiver one, and on a 16-game basis was fantastic. 130 targets, 86 receptions, had 1,219 receiving yards, 6 receiving touchdowns, 222.6 fantasy points. Again, with the 100 extra rushing yards and the extra rushing touchdown, it got him over the hump and got him into that wide receiver one conversation. But again, this is a guy that really shouldn't be slept upon. As of this moment in time, he's going in the middle of the 4th round against, amongst wide receivers that really haven't proven themselves like he has. Sure, that at times I even see Calvin Ridley drafted ahead of Robert Woods, which is kind of a surprise considering Robert Woods has already been a wide receiver one in the past. Last season would have been a wide receiver one, and Calvin Ridley, all he's proven is that he can get injured and that a guy like Julio Jones is probably going to limit him at times here and there with his overall productivity. But Robert Woods, he did start slow last year. And he did have a couple stats that may scare fantasy owners away from his potential in 2020. And one of those being touchdowns. The fact that he only scored 3 total touchdowns, only 2 through the air, is a little bit concerning. But that number is going to increase. I mean, that's the worst case scenario for a Robert Woods. Two receiving touchdowns in a year. Now that you get rid of Todd Gurley, you get rid of Brandon Cooks, there's not only more opportunity in terms of targets in the passing game, but down in the red zone, there's going to be more opportunities now that there's the 12 rushing touchdowns that every single season Todd Gurley was in line for. Those are now available, and sure, maybe one of these young backs wants to come and grab 8 of them, but there's going to be opportunity for Robert Woods to step up and even produce more in the touchdown game. On top of it, late in the season is kind of when Robert Woods got back into form. After the bye week, after week 8, and they got into the week 9 bye week, and then here comes week 10, Robert Woods was reborn. Ultimately, the amount of productivity he had on top of the amount of targets he had was ridiculous. From weeks 10 through 17, he averaged 15.53 fantasy points per game and was the number 8 overall wide receiver there, while he also missed 1 game in that stretch. In those 7 games that he played, he had 79 targets, which is an 11 target per game average, which is absolutely ridiculous. But then when we go and we look at Robert Woods last season, in the games that he was targeted 9+ times, he was averaging 15.15 fantasy points per game. I mean, you target this guy 9 times a game, he's going to produce, and that's 144 target pace for a 16-game season, which he wasn't very short of just this past season. And we definitely think that he's capable of going into 2020. Overall, I really do think that Robert Woods is undervalued and could easily be a wide receiver 1. Sure, he might not be competing with guys like Julio or Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams atop of the wide receiver 1 list, but he's certainly a guy that on the bottom, I would consider potentially wanting to have him over an Allen Robinson or an Amari Cooper, because I do know that sure, the touchdowns are going to eventually get there, and once they do, he'll be just as valuable as them, and I can get him at a cheaper price. Imagine being able to draft a Robert Woods in your 4th round and have him as your wide receiver 1 and him produce wide receiver 1 numbers. That's the discount that I want to take at the wide receiver position when I start with a couple early running backs or potentially go tight end early and be able to rely upon a Robert Woods, which definitely pays dividends overall. Another one of these stats that I wanted to mention, against the NFC West, the division he plays against with the Arizona Cardinals, San Francisco 49ers, and the Seattle Seahawks last season, he averaged 15.7 fantasy points per game against them. That in itself, extremely valuable. Another stat that I wanted to mention with Robert Woods before we move on is his total target rate. I mean, sure, we could take target share by dividing the amount of targets he had last season, 139, by the amount of total passing attempts Jared Goff had last season, over 600. But in reality, his true target rate is the amount of total targets he had over the amount of routes he ran. Because there are a lot of plays in which they might run an RPO and you see Robert Woods block, and in reality, he never really had a chance to get that pass. Or maybe he wasn't even on the field for some of these passing attempts that Jared Goff had. But either way, he had a 23.9% target rate, which is great. Even when he moved into the slot position, in which he ran 211 routes there, he had ran 211 routes there. He had 51 targets, which was a 24.17% target share or target rate. All in all, he's getting targeted. That's all you want to see. And even now, with Brandon Cooks gone, it's going to expand his role within this offense and give him even more opportunity to score fantasy points. Another one of these guys that, sure, he's going to be playing the outside for the Los Angeles Rams offense. He had 15 deep pass targets last season. Didn't catch too many of them, but if he's going to be given the opportunity to make plays deep, eventually he's going to crack off a couple of these and increase that total touchdown rate that lacked last season just a tad bit. But overall, we're getting there. You have the target share, you have the opportunity, and then you have yourself the upside of being a wide receiver 1 and the upside of his touchdowns absolutely increasing into this coming season. But either way, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about a guy like Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp, again, is one of the more underrated wide receivers in the National Football League, and that's mainly because of the fact that a lot of people see Cooper Kupp and think, you know what, he had a fluke season. He shouldn't really just be valued that high. There's no way he produces that well again. He slowed off at the end of the season when Robert Woods got hot. Let's not really, pay any attention to that. I'm glad you guys are doing that. If anybody watching the video right now is just not a fan of Cooper Kupp, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to have all the shares of Cooper Kupp I could possibly have because, to be honest, being drafted in the late 4th round, potential 5th round, and sliding in that direction, Cooper Kupp is a wide receiver that absolutely could deliver on a weekly basis and has proven that over the past 2 to 3 seasons in the National Football League and in this offense. I mean, besides the fact that he's Jared Goff's safety blanket, he's going to be a guy that continuously feasts in the slot position, always in mismatches, and being able to score as many touchdowns as he has because of how active he is down in the red zone. These are just all pluses. But moving on, let's talk about his stats that he produced last season. 134 total targets, 94 receptions. He had 1,161 total receiving yards. He only had 4 rushing yards, not a big deal last season. Had 10 receiving touchdowns, all for 223.50 fantasy points. He finishes the number 3 overall wide receiver. And sure, finishing as the number 3 overall wide receiver with those kind of statistics was a little bit of a downgrade in comparison to the year before. 2018, if you had produced 223 points, you were probably sitting at the back end of the wide receiver 1 conversation. But that's what Cooper Kupp is capable of doing. You know, a 223-point season is not something that he's probably going to shy away from in the future. He's definitely produced it now, and sure, there might be some touchdown regression, but with Brandon Cooks gone, like I've mentioned, there's going to be more targets in the air for a variety of wide receivers, and the way it looks like, it's going to be Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, and Tyler Higbee who are the main receiving options for this offense. And sure, maybe it's a one-year fluke, but to be honest, when we go back and when we look at what he was able to produce in 2018, he only played 8 games. And in those 8 games, had 56 targets, 40 receptions, 556 receiving yards, 6 receiving touchdowns, and 115.1 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. Again, I mean, in his career, 5 touchdowns in 2017, 6 touchdowns in 2018, and 10 touchdowns in 2019. The numbers just keep increasing, and he's just a guy that Jared Goff always wants to target down in the red zone. But even in 2018, the statistics that he was able to produce from weeks 1 through 5, he was the number 2 overall wide receiver, averaging 18 fantasy points per game. If he had played an entire season in 2018, he would have been a wide receiver 1 undoubtedly. Him and Robert Woods would have been another pair. We would have had ourselves Juju Smith and Antonio Brown, Diggs and Thielen, and Kupp and Robert Woods as another pair of wide receiver 1s dominating the position. And again, his production in 2018, it pretty much transferred over to 2019. From weeks 1 through 8 of 2019, Cooper Kupp produced 17.33 fantasy points per game through that stretch, and was the number 2 overall wide receiver. So Cooper Kupp, when he starts a season, he starts off hot. And I know a lot of people are concerned about the fact that perhaps, getting 87 targets in the first 8 weeks, that's almost 11 targets per week, and then how he tailed off at the end of the season because of how much usage we saw from Tyler Higbee and Robert Woods. Maybe Cooper Kupp's just not cut out for it. Maybe he's going to be a 6 to 7 target kind of guy every week, and he's just not going to be able to produce. But honestly, even when he wasn't given the 9+ targets that he possibly wants, he only gets 6 or 7. He was still able to produce. And in the back end of the season, a lot of touchdowns were there, but a lot of productivity was there. And if the touchdowns are always there because he's getting targeted so heavily in the red zone, I mean, he had 18 red zone targets. He was amongst the top 15 receiving options in terms of red zone targets last season. 18 of those targets leading to 7 total touchdowns on receptions. I mean, overall, Cooper Kupp is a dynamic wide receiver. He's going to make plays after the catch. He's always in mismatches. And if you're going to feed him the ball 9+ times, I mean, last season, in the 8 games that he was targeted 9+ times, he had 19.1 fantasy points per game. Against the NFC West, another one of these divisions that, again, they've got great defenders. They played him tough last year. He still averaged 14.07 fantasy points against them. Cooper Kupp's a monster. So is Robert Woods, and I don't understand why they continue to be undervalued. I mean, last season, the target rate for Cooper Kupp was 23.97% of the time, and when he was in the slot position, it was a 26.32% of the time. Overall, I mean, again, besides the fact that he's going to dominate in the slot, he had 69 receptions for 853 yards and 5 touchdowns just out of the slot last season. He's going to continue to improve. I mean, again, these 2 wide receivers are always guys that are going to make plays after the catch. They're never the biggest wide receivers on the field. They're never the fastest. They're never the best route runners, but they're definitely going to be able to catch the ball in open space and be able to make defenders miss eventually and get the yards after the catch. I mean, last season, Robert Woods was 3rd amongst all wide receivers with 480 yards after. Was it 480? I think it was 580. 580 yards after the catch. Cooper Kupp was just behind him, the 4th most amongst all wide receivers last season with 548 yards after the catch. I mean, when we look at the entire situation in which the Rams offense is in and the current ADP and value of these players, going in the 4th round is an absolute joke. A wide receiver 1 potential with the fact that there is no Todd Gurley there to snag touchdowns and there is no more Brandon Cooks. And sure, they might be still running 3 wide receiver sets because even last season they ran 3 wide receiver sets 73% of the time in comparison to the 12 personnel sets in which they ran it only 21% of the time. So sure, you might be thinking, oh, they're going to go double tight end this year, try to run, Everett and Higbee on as many routes as possible. Even that being the case, they're still going to run their 3 wide receiver sets, and it's going to continue to open up opportunity for Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. I mean, just looking at the passing offense of the Rams last season, they had the 3rd most passing attempts and completions in 2019. They had the 5th most passing yards, the 6th most passing first downs. They had the second most plays of 20 plus yards in the passing game. They gave up the fewest sacks amongst all offensive lines, despite how bad they were in the running game. They still gave up the fewest amount of sacks as an offensive line, and they had the third most receptions amongst all receiving options last season. All in all, the formula for success is there. I don't know why people are ignoring it, and that's exactly why I'm talking about it today. So, going into your upcoming seasons, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, extremely valuable prospects in my opinion. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. Are these guys that you're potentially going after in your upcoming drafts? Why do you think they're being undervalued as much as they are? Are the statistics that I'm talking about just not enough? Do you guys think that there's going to be a huge decline from the Rams? Again, I'm a Rams fan, but I'm realistic. I understand how the Rams of 2020 aren't going to be anything near what the Rams offense of 2018 was. That's clear to me. But overall, I still think these are extremely valuable wide receiver prospects that are being ignored. And I just wanted to go and talk about them today. So thank you everybody for watching. Make sure you click the like button down below. Again, subscribe if you have not already. Click the bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.